Welcome, everyone. My name is Laura Ravenel. I'm the Deputy Director of Research here at Rockefeller Institute, and I'll be moderating today's discussion on our panel on highways to health, reimagining our roadways. Today, we'll be hearing from panelists from across academia, policy, and practice on the relationship between highways and community health, and how cities and states can and are paving a new way forward. And I promise I will keep the puns to a minimum from here on out. Following our keynote speaker, I'll introduce each of our panelists who will have the opportunity to present, and then we'll open things up for a question and answer session. Just a reminder, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the webinar screen to submit questions, but we'll hold those for the end. One further housekeeping note while we're here, for those interested more broadly in local policy, sustainability, and environmental health, we'll be hosting a conference, Locally Sourced Municipal Green Policy Solutions, with the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry on September 9th. And that call for presenters is open until July 15th. We'll put that into the chat. That said, I think today's discussion is particularly important and timely. Several upstate cities in New York, including right here in Albany, along with cities across the country, have really begun the process of reimagining the relationship between their roads and their residents and trying to address the historical legacies and continued socioeconomic and environmental health impacts of earlier urban planning practices. And today's discussion is going to focus on Syracuse, New York, which is making significant strides in planning for and beginning to implement projects related to Interstate 81. These discussions really across the country are being bolstered by the historic funding now available through the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act related to highways, and $350 billion over 5 years. And the new programs that are related to those funding. We have programs related to climate resilience, electric vehicles, reconnecting communities. And on that note, I really want to welcome our keynote speaker, Matthew Driscoll. He currently serves as the Executive Director of the New York State Thruway Authority, overseeing one of the longest toll systems in the United States. Among his many, many credits prior to joining the Thruway Authority, he served as the Commissioner of the New York State Department of Transportation, as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation. And in addition, with respect to today's discussion, from 2001 to 2009, he served as the 52nd mayor of the city of Syracuse. Welcome, Matthew Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Laura, and good morning. Good morning, everyone. And let me start by thanking the Rockefeller Institute of Government for inviting me to take part in today's panel. My good friend, SUNY ESF President and Thruway Authority Board Chairperson, Joni Mahoney, sends her regards. She wishes she could have been here and participate in this important discussion. You know, I've known Joni a very long time, and I can say she is a true champion for Central New York and for addressing environmental issues. It's really an honor for me to join an esteemed group of individuals who share my commitment to improving our transportation infrastructure while being good stewards of the environment and appreciating the value of green infrastructure projects. Transportation and environmentally friendly, two things that are rarely in the same sentence, but should not be mutually exclusive. As the Executive Director of the Thruway Authority and former Commissioner of New York State DOT, I'm proud to say that our state's transportation agencies strive to incorporate environmental stewardship into projects and activities. In fact, we are at a historic time in our nation. Transportation agencies throughout the nation are reinventing themselves, focusing on equity, reconnecting communities, resiliency, and environmental sustainability. With billions in federal infrastructure funding on the way, agencies will now have the means to realize these goals sooner rather than later. The good news is that this vision has been coming into focus for a while now. And if we're to be honest with ourselves, we must acknowledge that our governments have made planning mistakes in the past, usually disproportionately impacting communities of color and economically disadvantaged communities, often destroying their neighborhoods. But we are now working to correct some of those historic injustices. And we have developed comprehensive strategies and have seen real world results. At the start of this century, the city of Milwaukee demolished the Park East Freeway, which was part of a grand vision to encircle the downtown business district with highways. Someone clearly thought that was a good idea, but opposition to it started way back in the 60s. However, it wasn't until the 21st century that the neighborhood was finally connected to the street grid. Building on the success of an adjoining neighborhood, the city voted to get rid of a 1-mile elevated freeway, which allowed 24 acres of downtown to be successfully redeveloped and attracted nearly $1 billion in investments along the way. Of course, reconnecting communities comes in many forms. And here in New York State, we have 3 great examples in Buffalo, Syracuse, and in Albany. In Buffalo, the state is looking at various options to reunite communities that were devastated by the construction of the Kensington Expressway over 50 years ago. The highway replaced a majestic tree-lined boulevard and cut off connections between surrounding neighborhoods. The state is now looking at ways to create open public spaces while making the area safer for pedestrians and cyclists. As Governor Hochul recently stated, we are committed to help right the wrongs of the past through transportation networks designed to bring communities together. And of course, this also applies to our very own I-81 community grid project that Mark Frechette will be presenting to you later in this program. And also just last month, the governor announced that the state DOT will replace a critical railroad bridge between Albany and the city of Rensselaer with a new structure featuring bicycle and pedestrian access. The Livingston Avenue Railroad Bridge is a very important link. Passenger rail service from New York City all the way to Western New York depends on it. But not only will it be replaced by a modern structure, it will include a separated shared use path connecting to the Albany Skyway and the Empire State Trail to Rensselaer, offering hikers, cyclists, and pedestrians a new and safer way to cross the Hudson River. You know, we at the Thruway Authority know a thing or two about shared use paths. The one on the Governor Mario M. Cuomo Bridge is over 3.5 miles long and has been visited by over 500,000 people since we opened it just 2 years ago. For the first time ever, people can walk or bike across the Hudson between Westchester and Rockland counties toll-free. And at the end of the day, we know that people who get outside feel less stressed and better about themselves and where they live. In fact, consideration of the environment impacts much of the work we do, and we're always striving to be more environmentally conscious. This includes wildflower plantings, integrating environmental initiatives into our service area redevelopment program, installing electric vehicle chargers at all of our service areas, and so much more. For example, in our Syracuse division, which maintains more than 130 miles of highway from the Mohawk Valley all the way to Rochester, Syracuse has been a true leader in spearheading efforts that benefit the environment. As you drive along that section in the Thruway, you will see areas full of beautiful and colorful wildflowers. By seeding with a native wildflower mix and reducing mowing in these areas, it allows the cultivation of native species, which supports pollinators. The Thruway has also planted living snow fences, which are rows of shrub willows strategically placed to minimize snow drifting. These reduce plowing and greenhouse gas emissions while also providing habitat to support pollinators, birds, and other animals. We are currently partnering with SUNY ESF to launch a pilot program which will identify areas along the Thruway to support vegetation that will capture and reduce higher salinity levels. The goal is to use plants that can absorb these higher salinity levels in identified areas, helping increase the habitat for pollinators, birds, animals, and benefit water quality, and also improve the overall aesthetics for our customers. A goal of mine has always been to instill the need that all staff at the authority be good stewards for the environment and leave the system better and healthier for the next generation. In other words, sustainability. We've made great strides when it comes to implementing environmental initiatives. As some of you may know, the Thruway Authority modernized our 570-mile system by converting to cashless tolling back in November of 2020. System-wide, the reduction of greenhouse gases resulting from the implementation of cashless tolling continues to benefit the climate. Removing the toll booths and the need to slow down, stop, or idle at the plazas is estimated to save over 4.5 million gallons of gasoline a year. And let's be honest, with the price of gas at $5, that also benefits consumers. And just last year, we began another major project to replace and redevelop all of our 27 service areas along the Thruway system. Empire State Thruway Partners is investing $450 million of private money, which will enhance our customers' experience and provide modern amenities for the 21st century. No toll dollars, nor any federal, state, or local tax dollars are being used to build this project. The designs of the new buildings promote sustainability and reduce energy consumption. Construction will be LEED certified principles and materials. In addition, the Thruway Authority is creating an expansive network of electronic vehicle charging stations, which is key to increasing the use of zero-emission electric vehicles across the state. Because of our ongoing investments in EV infrastructure, there will be high-level EV charging stations at each of the service areas by the end of 2024. Our goal is to create a robust end-to-end corridor of more than 120 fast-charging EV stations with an average of 30 miles between each location system-wide. We'll also continue to add more EVs to our statewide fleet and will continue to do so well into the future. You know, I believe that environmental stewardship is a responsibility, but it's also the right thing to do. In recent years, we've utilized permeable pavements at the Mario M. Cuomo shared use path, installed green infrastructure features to enhance the Piermont Marsh, and help successfully rebuild and restore the oyster population in the Hudson River near the bridge, and so much more. As technology continues to advance, so will the Thruway and the state's transportation agency's commitment to the environment and reducing transportation-related disparities. The Thruway invests a great deal of time and effort to encourage sustainability, and that's something that I take both personal and professional pride in. The New York State Thruway system is renowned as one of the safest and most reliable superhighways in the nation, and I will also say we're striving to be the greenest as well. We are undeniably and proudly part of a larger transportation movement to plan, design, and build smarter, greener, healthier, and fairer. We will achieve this vision together, and our state and our nation will be the better for it. Thank you again for inviting me to speak this morning, and now I'll turn it back to our moderator, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Driscoll, for your remarks and for sharing with us some of the exciting environmental and environmental health changes happening at the Thruway Authority. We'll now turn to our incredible panelists who will each present before we take some questions, beginning with Deputy Mayor for the City of Syracuse, Sharon Owens. Among the many hats she wears in her current position, the Deputy Mayor oversees city programs and services that address quality of life in the Syracuse community, including neighborhood and business development, diversity and inclusion programs, and the police and fire departments. She is the Chief of Staff to Mayor Ben Walsh and serves on the I-81 Community Stakeholder Committee. She also previously served as CEO of the Syracuse Model Neighborhood Facility Incorporated and as Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development for the City of Syracuse. So just a few hats. Welcome, Deputy Mayor Owens. Oh, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the Rock Institute for inviting me. Oh boy, we've been Zooming for a while and we still can't get the button cadence together. Thank you all, and good morning to you. It is a pleasure to be here. Executive Director Driscoll had spoken on so many points that I wanted to just talk about. And particularly when it comes to the 81 project, the I-81 project, over more than a decade of discussion, debate, community input, we are here. And the important part about that statement is the reflective look and perspective that we have when we say we are here and prepared to move forward on the project. And looking at the past practices and policies regarding infrastructure, and particularly highway and road development, and their impact on people. And so we're at a critical moment here, particularly in Syracuse, and the city has been leaning in, definitely working with our community partners, like the Urban Jobs Task Force, like the Syracuse chapter of the ACLU, to really speak about the role of highway, the role of infrastructure on the health and well-being of the residents of communities. I am so thankful that we're at a point in time in our country, and particularly in our state, where we're not discussing highway development just as brick and mortar, but how it is intrinsically involved and connected to the lives of the people, not only that drive on that infrastructure, but that also live, work, and play near and around that infrastructure. And what is the impact related to them? Equally important, and I consider as a health issue as well, is the economic impact, particularly for people in the communities impacted by road construction and by road development. And that's why we've been leaning forward about local hire provisions in this project. I am really proud of our community and looking at this project in a holistic manner, and in a way that we look at the health and well-being of people along with the efficiency of road development. I'm thankful to the Thruway Authority, and especially to the New York State DOT that continuously meets with city officials, myself and others, community stakeholders, to continue to shape the way we are going to redefine, again, generationally, what the 81 project will look like, feel like, and impact in a health way the residents of this community. How will available green space be effectively used to promote healthy living for individuals? How will health be incorporated during the construction project? How will health and wellness of individuals be considered, even as we look at the economic impacts that this $2 billion project will have on our local economy? I'm looking forward to the project getting underway. We are prepared for the hard work ahead of us, but meaningful work ahead of us. I'm ready and waiting for individuals across this country to look at Syracuse, New York, and this community as the model for how we move forward with infrastructure projects. I'm looking forward to the discussion. My colleagues, Mark Frechette, Dr. Teron is amazing in his environmental discussions around this topic. So I am looking forward to a fruitful and full conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor. Our next panelist is Dr. Auyon Ghosh, a Richard P. Nathan Public Policy Fellow here at the Rockefeller Institute of Government. Dr. Ghosh is an assistant professor of medicine in the Division of Pulmonary, Critical Care, and Sleep Medicine at SUNY Upstate Medical University in Syracuse. He is an active researcher and clinician, taking care of patients in the ICU and those living with lung disease. After graduating from medical school at SUNY Upstate, he completed his internal medicine residency training at Boston University Medical Center, a pulmonary and critical care medicine fellowship at Harvard Brigham and Women's Hospital, postdoctoral research training at the Channing Division of Network Medicine, and a master's in public health at the Harvard T. Chan School of Public Health. Welcome, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you to Director Driscoll. Thank you to Deputy Mayor Owens and Dr. Teron and Mark Frechette, and everybody for joining us today. So I will be talking about the health aspects of highways and traffic associated pollution as well as some Syracuse-specific preliminary data that I've taken a look at myself. As Laura mentioned, I'm a lung doctor and an ICU doctor here at SUNY Upstate, taking care of our sickest patients in the ICU and seeing patients with chronic lung diseases in the pulmonary clinic. I also do research. I focus on the genetics and genetic epidemiology of chronic lung diseases. And I also have an interest in better understanding how the environment affects human health and disease, specifically, obviously, looking at lung disease. So today, my goal is to just briefly talk about some of the data out there that looks at the long-term health impacts of air pollution, and specifically the impact on individuals who live near highways over a long period of time, over decades. I'm also going to talk about how it's not just, the effects of the cumulative effects of living near highways over time, but also looking at how short-term changes in air pollution can affect health in many different ways. And then finally, I'm going to present some data that some of the Rockefeller Institute folks have seen before. That's a very preliminary analysis that looks at the highway proximity, specifically I-81 proximity in Syracuse and asthma outcomes here in town. So we all sort of know that there's a well-established link between traffic-related air pollution and poor health outcomes, and this is across the board. It's not just chronic respiratory diseases like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and asthma. It's not just lung cancer, but it's also cardiovascular disease. Really, all-cause mortality is affected by long exposure to traffic-related air pollution. And this is from a really nice paper out in the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine just last month that looked specifically at the history of redlining and other sort of practices that propagated institutional and structural racism, and basically showed that the first conclusion being a little obvious, that traffic-related air pollution tends to be higher in highway adjacent neighborhoods, which is the panel A on the left side. And you see carbon monoxide, which is the first panel on the top left, filterable particulate matter at the top right, and as well as other measures in the bottom two panels, are all higher in the so-called red neighborhoods, which are the highway adjacent neighborhoods, which is sort of an obvious conclusion. But when we look at the kind of demographics of these highway adjacent neighborhoods, we see that these are the ones that are most affected by redlining practices. We see that the solid columns show the total proportion of the population, and as you can see, there's really a minority of the population that are living in these highway adjacent communities. But we see that the Black population is high; it has the highest proportion of that population. So not only are the redlining practices leading to the creation of these neighborhoods, but communities of color are the most affected. In this next paper, again, in the same journal from last month, they took a look at the long-term and short-term impacts of living near highways with high traffic-associated air pollution, and these were specifically looking at COVID outcomes. The thing that's sort of still at the top of our minds here in the healthcare field, and we see that COVID-related hospitalization, COVID-related respiratory support, COVID-related ICU admission, and COVID-related mortality is all higher with higher air pollution, higher particulate matter, higher nitric oxide, and higher ozone. We do see a little bit of a differential effect in terms of the timing. So it seems that higher exposure to traffic-related events, traffic-related air pollution over time increases your risk of having these adverse outcomes. That being said, even in the short term, we see that there's an increase in these COVID-related outcomes for short-term traffic-related exposure. So for both the short-term and long-term, we see that in the long term, we know the sort of well-established risk. B, we know that the highway adjacent neighborhoods tend to be ones that were created through redlining. And C, that even not just long-term, but short-term exposure affects COVID-related outcomes. In addition, this is another nice paper just from this month that shows daily changes in traffic-related air pollution can lead to increased mortality. So we see that the effect is most pronounced when it goes from low pollution to higher pollution, and the effect seems to level off a little bit at higher levels, like changes from a high level, an already high level, to a slightly higher level. But the effect is consistent across the board, whether it's all-cause mortality in the left panel, cardiovascular mortality in the middle panel, or respiratory mortality on the right panel. We see that there's an increase in daily mortality given an increase, any amount of increase in particulate matter concentration across the day. So this really drives home the point that regardless of health outcome that you care about, it gets worse, whether it's long-term exposure to traffic-related air pollution or short-term, even daily increases in exposure to traffic-related air pollution. So moving on to highway proximity in Syracuse specifically, this is data from the New York State Department of Health, which basically shows the distribution of asthma-related emergency room visits for kids from a few years ago. And as you can see, it's very concentrated to the center area of Onondaga County. And then if you overlay on top of that the distribution or the map of the highways in Syracuse, you see that these highly affected zip codes are the ones that are right next to the highways. And I did some basic statistical analysis and adjusted the rates for demographics. Obviously, I didn't have individual level data, so we're missing a lot of important confounders. But the take home here is that in I-81 adjacent zip codes, there was a higher rate than expected. The observed versus expected rate was higher in the I-81 adjacent and lower in the non-I-81 adjacent for asthma-related ER visits. And this is just a table that kind of shows that at the top we have the I-81 adjacent zip codes, and at the bottom we have the non-I-81 adjacent zip codes. And 6 out of the 9 I-81 adjacent zip codes had a higher observed than expected, whereas only 1 zip code that wasn't I-81 adjacent had a higher observed versus expected asthma ED visit for kids. And what's special about that one non-adjacent zip code? Well, it's the zip code that includes the airport here. So the take-home point really is here that, in this very preliminary analysis, that we do see the suggestion of an effect. Now, again, like I mentioned, there's some important takeaways from this. So first, we all know that traffic-related air pollution is higher in airway adjacent neighborhoods, sort of an obvious conclusion, but as has been well established through decades of data, that longer-term exposure is associated with worse health outcomes over time. In addition, we also see there's emerging data that higher pollution in the short term is associated with worse outcomes. For instance, the data I showed was related to COVID-19. In Syracuse, again, we saw that proximity to the I-81 corridor was associated with higher rates of asthma-related ER visits. But again, as I mentioned, this is a very preliminary analysis. We need sort of individual level data rather than this bird's eye view aggregated data to really drive home this point. So what are the next steps? So should we be targeting and screening these individuals who live near highways for cardiovascular disease and lung disease? That's a question to think about moving forward. And then planning for possible adverse events during major construction projects like the I-81 viaduct project. There's been a lot of discussion and planning for how to take care of the folks who live near the area, and incorporating, as Deputy Mayor Owens mentioned, community stakeholders and the healthcare field to make sure that we move forward in the safest way possible. And as I mentioned, getting individual level data from the communities that are affected to really drive home this point to really establish firmly and the association of asthma-related outcomes and IAD1. So with that, I'll take any questions and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh. I think we'll just hold questions till the end, but a reminder again, you'll be able to put those into the question and answer function at the bottom of your window. Our next panelist is Mark Frechette. He's worked for the New York State Department of Transportation since 1985 with diverse management experience and engineering experience in construction, highway design, structures, planning, program management, local programs, and emergency response, to name a few. He is currently the I-81 Viaduct Project Director at the DOT. The 81 Viaduct Project that we're discussing today is, as Mark has noted previously, one of the largest transportation projects that the State Department of Transportation has ever embarked on, with many challenges to provide not only transportation solutions, but enhanced livability, sustainability, and economic vitality to the surrounding communities in central New York. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mark Frechette.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate the opportunity to participate on this distinguished panel and look forward to the conversation that we're going to have on health and the highways. I am going to focus mainly on the project that is going to be implemented within downtown Syracuse. On May 31st, 2022, just a few weeks ago, DOT and FHWA signed the record of decision selecting the community grid alternative to replace the aging I-81 viaduct in downtown Syracuse. The record of decision satisfies the National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA, and the State Environmental Quality Review Act, known as SEQR. This step in the process completes the preliminary design phases and provides the necessary federal and state approvals to move the project into the final design phases and ultimately into the construction phases. I want to recap the 81 or the community grid alternative because many people don't know about the project. So I'll briefly tell you what the community grid is. Essentially, the community grid is recommending that between the northern interchange up here at I-81 and 481, down through interstate, down through Syracuse, down to the southern interchange, 81, 481, that would become be redesignated as Business Loop 81, and then the interstate corridor around the city, known as Interstate 481, would become Interstate 81. The Business Loop 81 would remain a high-speed freeway north of 690. Interstate 690 is right here. The thruway I-90 is right here, if you can see my pointer. But north of I-690, it remain a high-speed freeway. And really south of the Dome area here, it still would remain a high-speed freeway. So the section that is the 30-mile-per-hour section will mainly be from 690 down to about the Dome area, which is a little over a mile long. DOT will own the entire Business Loop 81 from the northern interchange down through to the southern interchange. The idea behind the community grid alternative is much more than only the Business Loop 81. The interstate runs right where my pointer is, right through the heart of the city, which will be removed. The community grid will establish the connection, the Business Loop 81, which is shown here on the Almond Street corridor. But it really looks to efficiently try to get people to where they want to go. This is the University Hill area here. We're making a new connection on 690 at Cross and Irving to have direct access to the Hill Today, many people come in through the interstate system, and this will really disperse a lot of the traffic. We're proposing to maintain the Clinton Street off-ramp, redo the West Street interchange, and create 2 new access points here at Oswego Boulevard and then the Pearl Street on-ramp. We also, as part of the project, will convert many streets from one-way to 2 ways, including Krause, Irving, Adams, and Harrison, to better connect neighborhoods and the community. So DOT is moving forward. This is Syracuse down here. This is a blow up on the right-hand side of all the construction work. And I don't have time to go into a lot of the detail, but I do want to talk about a few things that we're doing here. We will replace the viaduct, which exists right where my pointer is, the 1.4 mile Interstate 81 viaduct, and replace it with Business Loop 81. We'll also rebuild I-690 from like Beach Street all the way over to Leavenworth. This is also a major 3 to 4 lane facility, interstate facility in each direction. This will remain elevated through the heart of the city. The DOT is planning on dividing the community grid solution into 8 individual construction contracts. These smaller contracts will allow for more local competition, and local contractors will be able to place bids for this size construction contracts. 2 phases of construction. Phase 1, which is anticipated to start by the end of this year, includes 5 separate construction contracts, estimated at a construction cost that exceeds $1 billion. And this will take approximately 3 years to do all of this construction between 2023 and the end of 2025 to construct all 5 projects. The 1.4 mile section of the viaduct that's elevated will be maintained throughout all of phase 1. It will not be until all 5 of these first projects get completed that we eliminate the interstate through the heart of the city. We have significant work to do along the 481 corridor to bring that up to speed to handle additional traffic and improve the capacity of the 481 corridor. Close to well over $500 million is being spent on Interstate 481 to convert it to Interstate 81. In 2026, we will begin phase 2. There are 3 separate contracts that will implement to build phase 2, which the combination of those 3 is around $1.2 billion worth of construction. And that is anticipated to also take 3 years and be completed by 2028. I want to just talk about 2 of the 8 contracts. The first one, contract 5, is down on the south side. The removal of I-81 viaduct will occur in 2 contracts. This contract 5 and also contract 8, which I'll talk about after. The construction work. This is a view of Colvin Street here, the new off-ramp to Colvin Street. The limits are from Burt Street to Colvin Street. Now, those familiar with downtown Syracuse Housing Authority is right next to Burt Street. This is contract 5. Construction work includes a new northbound off-ramp to Colvin right here. This, coupled with new full access to East Glen Ave Bridge, which is south of here, gives motorists south of the city new access points to Syracuse University, the Hill, South Side, and Outer Comstock area neighborhood. This 5th contract includes the new NYS&W Railroad Bridge over Business Loop 81, and this will transition from the higher speed freeways to the slower 30-mile-per-hour speeds. This is the MLK school. You'll see in some of the drawings that we have numerous noise wall installations, transportation upgrades in front of the school. We're proposing, we're creating a buffer zone between the transportation system and the south side. They'll serve to separate the transportation system from the community. Through our public outreach, we moved our roundabout, which was planned at MLK, to Van Buren, which is just north of the railroad bridge, creating a new access point to University Hill from the business loop. The most important thing to recognize about the contracting is that Interstate 81 through Syracuse is maintained. All the upgrade work to 481, once that's completed, and all three contracts downtown that are completed will rip out the interstate. The interstate is right where my pointer is right now. It's been taken out in this visual. But this first contract by the end of 2005 will be the first time the viaduct comes out of use. The other contract that we have, contract 8, which is in phase 2, which will remove the remaining portion of the viaduct, which is the majority of it. This is I-690 right here, and this is the Almond Street corridor that's going to become Business Loop 81. This is heading to the south. Majority of the viaduct exists over the Almond Street corridor and all needs to be removed under this phase of the work. We have lots of work to do. Sharon had mentioned some of the collaboration going on between the city and the state related to the transportation features. There's a lot we're doing here in Contract 8 related to Wilson Park upgrades. We have significant stormwater sanitary separation work, major utility works that we're doing along this corridor. And then this is really the creation of the new business loop corridor downtown with pedestrian, bicycle, and transit accommodations. As Sharon mentioned, we are here. We are to the point now that we've completed the record of decision that a lot of the approvals have been obtained, and we're pushing towards the selection of contractors and preparing final design details to secure contractors next year. But to get to this point has been a journey, to say the least. The community grid alternative was selected based on a balanced consideration of the need for safe and efficient transportation, the social, economic, and environmental effects of the proposed transportation improvement, and national, state, and local environmental protection goals. There are many factors that played into the decision-making selection of the community grid. Transportation, managing traffic and congestion includes other modes, pedestrian, bike, and transit consideration. Neighborhood character is important. Social groups like the elderly and individuals with disabilities were considered. Environmental justice, minority populations, and low-income populations that live adjacent to the viaduct in throughout the city of Syracuse was a consideration. Land acquisition, we're taking 4 commercial buildings and no residential displacement as a result of this project. Local and regional economy was very important. Jobs initiatives are something that we all take pride in. And we use something at DOT for every dollar that is spent in construction. It runs through the community 4 times with the quadrupling the value of the dollar within Central New York, which is big for the restaurants, it's big for the hotels, it's big for people who supply goods, it's big for labor. Historic and cultural resources. We need to protect resources in Syracuse. There's a lot of things that we work very hard to ensure that we protect for future generations. Parks and recreation resources. Certainly the Wilson Park upgrades will be a major improvement to that area. Other things considered: air quality. We did a full analysis, was performed air quality analysis. You can go see our FEIS review that air quality analysis. Energy and climate change, that's very important. Noise, we're installing over a mile of noise walls in the project, in multiple projects. 15 noise walls will be installed along Business Loop 81 and the new Interstate 81 to protect the residents from the noise that's generated on the transportation system. Water resources, things like wetland reestablishment, stormwater benefits, separation of sanitary and stormwater have huge benefits for the water quality in Onondaga Lake and has big benefits for the treatment plant that is run by Onondaga County. Wildlife, general ecology, we protect endangered species, bald eagles, long-eared bats, and many, many more. Asbestos and lead is something that we deal with when we're removing buildings and we're removing bridges. Numerous construction techniques are being employed on the project. Containment, removal, and disposal of lead and asbestos being implemented to protect workers and residents that are adjacent to the viaduct. Hazardous waste and contaminated materials, there is some in downtown Syracuse, and we'll clean it up as part of the projects that we're implementing. And then construction effects, there's temporary increases in noises, emissions, detours. We want to minimize the impacts when we implement this project. And we're working with the community in groups like Civil Liberties Union, Urban Jobs Task Force, the City of Syracuse, and many, many others, Pioneer Homes, Syracuse Housing, to try to avoid impacts as much as we can on this $2 billion construction project that is heading to construction later this year. So this was just a quick synopsis of the project and in the two contracts, which will include the removal of the 1.5 miles of viaduct through Syracuse. I look forward to the conversation. I'll turn it back over to Laura.
Thank you so much, Mark, for giving us the insight into some of the planning process and the road ahead for the next few years. We look forward to seeing that work unfold. Last, but certainly not least on our panel is Assistant Professor Lemir Teron from the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. He received his PhD from the University of Delaware College of Engineering and has been a member of the SUNY ESF faculty since 2016. In 2019, he received the Distinguished Faculty Member for Teaching Excellence Award. His research focuses on urban sustainability, climate change and legacy pollution, and energy justice. And he's worked with a range of community and municipal groups in Central New York on environmental justice issues related to urban forestry and pertinent to our discussion today, transportation planning. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Teron.
Thank you, Laura. You always are very pleasant with the introductions. I feel like I've been demoted, though. The last time you invited me for something, I actually was the keynote. So just joking with you. But anyway, I want to thank the Rock Institute and the co-panelists for today's event. And I know we may be running a little late on time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, so this slide feeds back on or piggybacks off of a slide that you previously saw by one of the co-panelists. Let me just give you very briefly my history and involvement with the redevelopment of I-81. I moved to the city of Syracuse in the summer of 2016, and within 2 to 3 months, a local community organization reached out to me, the Southside Neighborhood Association, and they said, well, there's a project in the pipeline, this interstate that's 50, 60 years old. It's going to be redeveloped, excuse me, and it cuts through historically a predominantly Black neighborhood. Can you please, based on your professional skill set, provide us with an environmental justice analysis? Up until then, I did not know the magnitude nor the history of the situation. And pretty much anytime a community organization reaches out like that, you're pretty much bound to help further their cause if you have the research skill set to do so. So ever since then, I've been working with the wonderful folks locally on this issue. So this is back in 2016. And then a couple of years later, the original draft environmental impact statement came out. And as our previous panelists stated, these are some of the considerations. So even prior to them, when I was providing that environmental justice analysis for the local community organization, I was thinking, well, what could potentially be the air quality issues, not just of any redevelopment, but of the status quo? What are the climate concerns of having thousands of cars come through your neighborhood, whether it be in an interstate situation or a series of streets? You know, certainly anytime you have an interstate in your backyard, there are going to be noise implications. We need to talk about socioeconomics. So hopefully during Q&A, let's talk about socioeconomic context, which is Syracuse and where jobs are going and where jobs historically haven't gone. And then there are a whole range of land acquisition issues that the community should be aware of. Some involve permanent property takings. Apparently, there are only going to be 4 of those, but there also are the potential for easements or temporary property takings or temporary uses of property called easements. And we need to think about that, right? Specifically when you're thinking about a structure that may accommodate property owners and how it treats renters. So when we're thinking about environmental justice, we need to be thinking about cumulative threats and what are overlapping threats. So there are some things that have nothing to do with transportation planning that environmental justice communities may be at heightened vulnerability to. So I just want to take the next couple of slides, the next few minutes, just to show you, if you've never been to Syracuse, just to give you a ground level view, or that bird's eye view, even that Dr. Ghosh spoke about earlier. So we'll rotate between those. And then just keep in mind that the whole undergirding of anything I'm going to contend from an environmental justice perspective is simply meeting regulatory environmental thresholds. That's not the same as providing justice for communities. That's not the same as ensuring public health. So if you've never been to Central New York, if you've never been to Syracuse, this is the main thoroughfare we've been talking about. So you have I-81 right here. You have some world-class educational and medical facilities right here. You have a good deal of public housing on either side of the interstate. And if you look very closely, so you have the world famous dome right here. It's recently changed the name. Don't ask me what it's called now. And my office is right here. So if you look closely, can you see me waving? That's a joke. Maybe you're laughing at home. So here's that bird's eye view we were speaking about. You have I-81 that literally runs on top of Pioneer Homes. So this is public housing in Central New York or in Syracuse. And once again, we're looking at this from an environmental justice perspective. So we need to understand this issue. We need to be thinking about vulnerability, not just from the impact of, are you going to be exposed to particulate matter or noise? Think about the cumulative environmental assault. So, you know, if having an interstate on top of your apartment isn't enough, oh, guess what? You look in the back, you see a natural gas facility. And then if you were to take a walk around some of these neighborhoods, you'd ask a question, where's the closest supermarket at? Where's the shopping center at so I can get sustenance? So in order to understand these issues, specifically when you're dealing with Black communities in Syracuse and beyond, I'd urge anybody to think not just transportation issue. Once again, we need to be thinking about the preponderance of conditions that have been thrust upon communities. It's kind of coincidental in the wintertime. That's a Syracuse University owned and operated plant, which they sell energy to my campus. So I get to stay warm in the wintertime due to that facility when I'm in my office. But a question you should be asking, well, who actually works in that facility? And that's maybe another conversation for another day, but that should be part of the conversation. And then here's another view. You have the bird's eye, but you also have the ground level view. You know, you look at that, you look at the image to the left, and it's almost an image of contempt. And this is not a unique image for Syracuse. We can see these type of proximities with interstates and recreational facilities all over the country. You know, we go just to our west in Rochester, you'll see a skate park built under an interstate. And, you know, thinking of Wilmington, Delaware, Philly, you know, Orlando, Florida, Atlanta, any city in the country, unfortunately, most had this type of proximity of recreation to interstate. And probably the most shocking thing to me when I was reviewing that draft environmental impact statement, what is that, about 3 or 4 years ago now, a portion of this park was actually slated to stay open during construction. Like, that's further contempt, right? Why would you ever have that magnitude of construction, as our colleagues have said, a $2 billion construction project, and not have that entire park relocated or have that entire facility closed? And then here's just another image of, if you don't like the over top view, you can see the proximity of young people, young persons playing basketball in that interstate overhead. And this is Wilson Park in Syracuse. And then once again, it's not just a recreation thing or a housing thing. Where are we sending our schools? So once again, if we keep with this contempt motif, now, fortunately, in many states, including it looks like New York State now, this proximity, you have STEAM at Dr. King. This is an elementary school that has a very unhealthy exposure or proximity, to an interstate. So it looks like with new legislation in New York State, you're no longer going to have this level of proximity. But when we think about restorative justice, what does that do for the children who have had proximity to this type of facility for the past 30, 40, or 50 years? And Dr. King at STEAM at Dr. King, that's not the only public school within proximity of the redevelopment project. So just rounding up, a couple of things to think about. I've written a lot in various capacities on this issue. Recently, last month, I had a piece come out in the Law Journal, kind of analyzing the environmental impacts of this. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely check my website out. And I kind of democratize all my scholarship, so you're welcome to read it for free. You don't have to go through a firewall. Or if you're interested in a more popular piece, I've written in the local newspaper about these issues as well, if you want a little bit more popular access. So with that being said, I'm going to hand the mic off to Laura. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to some rich Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Teron. I want to know, there are no demotions around here, only promotions, and we're very grateful and glad to have you back again. As we turn to the Q&A portion, I just want to remind everybody there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your webinar window. Please use that to submit your questions, and we'll collect them and then share them with the panelists. Our first question reads, Syracuse is not alone. Rochester, Buffalo, Albany, and other cities are all taking similar steps at various stages of working to reimagine and remake their roads. And far more cities across the Northeast and US are doing the same. What can and should those other cities learn from the example of Syracuse, particularly with respect to their planning processes?
Well, I'll just speak to what I spoke to earlier in the collaborative conversation around realizing that infrastructure, particularly large road projects, are not just a project in isolation, that it is connected in so many multiple places. And I think that, and Mark will be sure to correct me because we meet so much that we have that relationship now, that really forced, I think, or pushed or moved DOT to a method in a conversation in areas that weren't common conversations before. Local hire, this environmental discussion we're having today, really have us thinking about these projects in a larger perspective now. And you have to have that local commitment. Much of that local commitment has been really the voices of the community in this, in us. So many people were around when the highway was built originally and have vivid memories of that experience and have translated that experience to their children and grandchildren. And so it is not just the rumor of a history of the impact of highway development. It is the living and breathing testimony of people in our community that are driving discussions that would not normally happen.
I'll jump in if you don't mind. I think a lot of things can be learned. I'll just offer two. There's been a lot of talk about the integration of folks who have historically, specifically African-American folks, into the local workforce, folks who have historically been locked out of trade unions. How can folks get access to jobs, whether it be trade union jobs, CDL operators? So it's one thing to talk about these things. We'll see if all the talk leads to meaningful integration, because if you've ever been to Syracuse, you know that, I always say you want to know about economic segregation in Syracuse, go downtown during rush hour, look at who's going into buildings, and then consequently, look who's not going into buildings. So I think that job creation may be one thing that we potentially can capitalize on. And then just from a grassroots level, I think that there have been some dynamic partnerships and collaborations that have been built over the last several years. I'm talking about grassroots level NGOs and neighborhood organizations, working with researchers like myself, partnering with city and government officials to create meaningful change. I've been on so many panels and interacted with our good deputy mayor so many times. And one of my things is, hey, never ask me to speak on a panel after Deputy Mayor Owens. You all don't listen, please. I want to go before. I never want to speak after Deputy Mayor Owens, but she's good people. And I'm not always a flag waver when it comes to people who work in city halls, but I have a lot of respect for the good colleagues that I've been able to work with in City Hall on this issue and other levels across the course of this process.
Yeah, Laura, I'd like to add just a little bit, maybe just a little bit different perspective. And mine's going to be more from the transportation side, but people look at the interstates being built, and why were the interstates built? They were built for military purposes. They were built to connect cities. They were built to connect states, and economically, a lot of things grew up around some of the interstate systems. I think what happened back in the 50s and 60s, and the viaduct that we're talking about in downtown Syracuse was started in the late 50s and to be constructed. And at that point in time, there was not the regulation that was in place. The National Environmental Protection Agencies, the state environmental quality review protections that are put in place today. It's a monumental task to go through those processes. A lot of things that have been talked about and a lot of laws that have been created are really created to protect the community. And on this project, I would say that, and really all projects, any project you spend federal or state money on in the transportation arena, you're satisfying environmental justice. You're satisfying, hazardous waste contamination cleanup. You're satisfying water quality. They didn't do that in the 50s and 60s. So we have evolved as a society to implement projects in a way that are much safer, a lot less impactful for the community. I think what this project has turned the dials on. And a lot of times it's such a large project. We have 50, 60 bridges that we're replacing. Not one, it's like 50 or 60 of them. It's Interstate 81, it's Interstate 41, it's Interstate 690. Miles of interstate are being removed to reconnect the community. That's a big thing in downtown Syracuse. So I think some of the things that are really turning the dials here, quality of life, it's not just about transportation, it's about the community. And that's why the partnership that the state and the city have is so strong in a unified approach to try to move the project forward in a manner that's going to be consistent with the vision that the city has, but also to provide that safe transportation network that's going to be able to facilitate getting those emergency services to upstate and to get those students to ESF and to get people to their businesses downtown. So I think we've taken a large step. There's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of work to be done with the community. We haven't put one shovel in the ground yet. So everything's talk up to this point. things are really need to continue as we hire contractors and move forward.
Great, thank you all. The second question is, given the changes being implemented to I-81, are we likely to see, or will we be able to measure the changes in environmental health and justice outcomes for residents when the projects are complete? And are there plans to conduct related research when that time comes or throughout the project's implementation? I guess that could go to anyone here.
I guess I'll jump in on that. And you know, one of the key aspects, as all the panelists mentioned in the last question, is kind of the engagement of the community stakeholders, and you know, health being one of the main concerns of the community stakeholders. And as in collaboration with the Syracuse Housing Authority, several clinicians and other institutional figures at SUNY Upstate have been involved in kind of the planning of what sort of healthcare resources are going to be available as part of this remediation process. Now, the question of, are we going to be studying this? It's a little bit more of a complex question, because this is, you know, rather than our main goal is to provide the resources necessary to the community and address the community concerns. And this is a community that historically has been, you know, subjected as Mark Frechette was just saying, in the past to you know, these sort of initiatives from on high without the type of engagement, community engagement that we have now. So in the future, this any sort of research or studying or anything like that really has to come from the community, because it's a population that's been subjected to many different things and is as part of that, rightfully so, you know, sort of hesitant to just be studied over and over again, rather than receiving any of the sort of benefits of the work that's being done.
Yeah, I want to talk very briefly about measurement and kind of integrating what Dr. Ghosh said about these projects being community driven. So you can absolutely measure. We just proposed a project in relation to measuring air quality or sampling local air. So we're going to do some high end, if funded by the federal government. We'll do some high end air monitoring, which requires $50,000 pieces of equipment. But we're also partnering, not let me come into your school after the fact. We're actually partnering with Syracuse City School District to, you got the $50,000 monitor. I'm not trusting a 10-year-old kid with that, but we're also going to, if funded, get some $120, $150 monitors and actually put those not just in schools, but hopefully local libraries. So communities will be empowered to sample. You break a $150 monitor, it's a headache, no big deal though. Why is that important? Ultimately, I want to see the local population integrated into the educational and economic fabric of the region. So you ultimately have kids who live in pioneer homes go across the street and end up studying in my class at ESF. Same thing with Syracuse University. And let's not stop with children. I want to make sure that mom, dad, auntie, or whoever can actually get a job at these institutions and these facilities. So monitoring is one thing, but I want to see increased integration into the educational and workforce of places that are literally just a couple blocks apart. We have to do better in making sure that it is a seamless transition, not just with the eradication of an interstate, but the eradication of invisible barriers that are keeping people, not giving people full entree to these facilities.
I'll switch gears just a little bit, just to say the thing that now that we're at a final decision that keeps me up at night is information, is the onslaught of information that will have to be on a constant basis. I've never lived through one of these projects, Mark. I don't know about you, but just the thought of construction within city proper happening as soon as next year. And how do we create a pipeline of information for people every moment of every second of every day about what is the next phase and what is the next impact on individuals in this community throughout the different phases. Getting to the project, the construction itself, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a construction person, but I'm an individual that understands that the communication aspect of this project is going to be critical. When we have to plow a road and shut it down for an hour, I know the phone calls I get for that. I cannot imagine what's going to happen if we don't let people know well in advance that their route to school, work, play is going to change.
Yeah, so I'll just let the group know, and I know Sharon knows this, and others know this, that during COVID, we ended up having to close our outreach center, our community outreach center that was centrally located. And that really did help to communicate with the public as the project evolved. And we all hit the pause button with COVID, it seems like, and we shut down our outreach center for safety reasons. But it is our plan to reopen that before any construction starts. We'll have 5 contractors, potentially 5 different contractors working, only 3 in the city, Sharon, 2 outside the city, but there's going to be a lot of things happening, and there needs to be very good communication with the community, because Sharon's points are excellent. They are things that keep me up at night too, is how we're going to share information when you think about 100,000 people are on 81 every day, and 100,000 people are on I-690 every day. And where are they going? They're going right through Syracuse every day. You know, our communication with the media, with the news, with our outreach center is integral to our success. We're a little ways away from that. People will not see a lot of construction this year. We'll have a shovel in the ground towards the end of the year, but come next year, there'll be a lot of work going on, and we've got to work out some of those details. And I'm confident with the relationship that the city and the state has, that we'll be able to figure out good ways to getting the information out to the community.
Great, thank you all for those comments. A lot of fruit for further thought. I see one more question I want to get to before we kind of close things up for the afternoon. Somebody's asking if you can describe the challenges for localities and for the state in funding a project or a set of projects as significant as this, particularly with respect to addressing environmental health challenges therein.
Well, I guess I'll take the first shot at that. First, on the financing, we have partners at our Federal Highway Administration, and New York State gets a set amount of funding. That funding was increased as part of the new transportation bills that got passed by Congress last year, which really brought more money to New York State. This project, as has been mentioned, has been talked about for 10 years, and the timing of the interstate being removed, we spend millions of dollars every year just maintaining the structure so that people can drive on it every year. And we don't know always when those calls are going to come, but if you look outside Sharon in my window right now, you could probably see some of our workers working on that right now just to keep it going. This is not outside of what other people across the country are dealing with the interstate system. If you take a look right now from a transportation perspective, DOT has already replaced lots of interstate bridges. We've replaced lots of interstate roads. And across the country, they've done that. We have a high concentration of traffic volumes. We have a high concentration of snow and ice, which leads to salt usage on our transportation system that really deteriorates things a lot quicker than what they experience in Florida, and a lot quicker than what they experience in Texas. So, just from a funding standpoint, it really requires setting priorities. This is a huge, huge investment in Central New York. You think about $1 billion of funding that's going to construction over the next year. The entire state budget for transportation last year was like $1.8 billion. And this is over $1 billion just being spent in Central New York. It's not being spent in Buffalo. It's not being spent in Albany. It's not being spent in Poughkeepsie or New York City. It's being spent in Central New York. So the economic benefits of that are going to be reaped in Central New York. So economically, it's our turn. It's our turn. This bridge, we've kept it going as long as we can. It is safe, but it's time for that to come out.
Thank you so much. Did anybody else have any closing comments before we begin to wrap up?
I'll just say where I started, the moment has arrived. I think that we are a community that is well capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. And when I say that, I mean constructing a infrastructure project we can be proud of, while at the same time caring for the people who not just drive on it, but live around it.
I'll close with this. As others have suggested, this is an important project because it's going to be a precursor to similar projects around the country. This is not hyperbole when I say this. This is the most important transportation environmental justice project in the United States today. Let's make sure we get it right.
Thank you all so much. And I want to thank everybody viewing today. Thank Executive Director Driscoll for joining us, and especially to all of our panelists here today. You've given us a lot to think about, not only in Syracuse and as the project for ID1 unfolds over the next several years, but for all of us across the nation as we begin to really imagine these relationships between our roadways and our residents. So thank you very much, and I wish everybody a good day.